Hi guys, we're here at Sim Formula Europe and we've got Marcel Offermans with the new game that he's working on, The Last Garage. It still has that name.
It has no name, but yeah, everybody calls it The Last Garage. I'm fine with that. Yeah.
And what we're going to do in this video is, because this game's not out, we're going to take a look at it, we're going to talk about the development, we're going to delve into some of the aspects of physics. It's going to be a super nerdy video. No, nothing too intense or too exciting, but very nerdy. And you can take it all in, and you'll probably be worse for it because you'll know more about sim racing, and he wants to know more about sim racing. So, right, can you talk us through where we are at the moment? What's happening right now on the screen?
Yeah, so we're in the pit lane at Anglesey. Anglesey is actually the test track that BAC use a lot for their Mono R and the other mono models. So it's a track where they have a lot of data with the car. That actually helped us develop the car as well, because yeah, we could compare lap times and all the other telemetry between the real car and ours. The track is actually laser scanned, so it should be pretty accurate as well. And yeah, I think we should just take it out of the garage, start driving and explore the track. I don't know if you've ever driven there.
I do not know, Anglesey, no. I mean, I've seen it on the fifth gear. Do you remember these? A lot of car reviewers in the UK use the track. So to get going, we're going to push the clutch.
Yeah, starter button.
The starter.
Okay.
There we go.
Smash the throttle and get it in first.
What's the approach with this simulator that's you would say is different from other simulators at the moment?
So what I'm trying to aim for is to be a realistic simulator. So I'm going for the driver feeling. That should be good, and that's my focus has been last year. And
I've already broken your car. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite sturdy, so don't worry. And we found the track back. But for me, it's all about the driving feeling. Because if you build anything and the driving's not fun, there's no point in building anything else around it. So that has to be right, and that has been the focus all along. And it will continue to be the focus for the next couple of years as we're developing this further. And to get to that level, I'm really trying to work with manufacturers so I get good data from different cars, and I can actually implement that well in the sim, have their test drivers actually try the sim and give feedback on it. So we're doing that with BAC right now. That will continue into the year. We're certainly not done there. And we've also just lined up a research project together with Donkervoort and Heusingveld actually, to build a digital twin for their new sports car that they're currently developing. And we're going to try and see if we can help in the development of that new car, help set up suspension and everything by driving it in the sim and optimizing it there. Because the typical way they do it right now is to just build a car with a ridiculously expensive and configurable suspension, and they just start driving it on different tracks, let drivers give feedback, and then they fiddle with that until the feeling is good. So that's quite an expensive process, because you have to rent tracks and track time and get cars there and stuff. So we'll see if we can help out with that process, and also help out in terms of getting more advanced hardware. I mean, you know the guys at Heusingveld. Niels is the uber nerd when it comes to hardware and tweaking with that kind of stuff. So we have all kinds of ideas on how to improve pedals and shifters and all kinds of things like that, and see if we can build a unique simulator for them.
Can you explain the two main different types of tyre model that you get in driving simulators, and the tyre model that this is using, and the reason why you've gone down that road? You'll be much better with words than me.
I'll try and explain. So there's the empirical models, which basically create a tire model based on a whole bunch of parameters that you get from actually measuring real tires and the response to all kinds of different situations. And the most popular model there is the Pajeka model. That's been used in the industry a lot as well, so that has the advantage that A lot of manufacturers have data on those tires in that format. That's the model that I'm using because it allows me to quickly fine-tune a tire and tweak it until it gets exactly the same response as you get in real life. The thing with those models is they're not really based on physics. They have these ridiculously configurable curves that kind of gave the same response as the real tire, but the formulas themselves are not really like physics formulas.
The Pajenka tire model.
Yeah.
You're saying,
Yeah. And then there's the other type of model where you almost go into a finite element method, fully physics based. You divide a tire into lots of little pieces and you simulate each little piece of that tire and all the physics for it. That allows you to create a model of the tire that is much closer to the real thing if you get all those properties right. And it's a model that, for example, rFactor2 uses, and they get great results with that as well. But it's also a model that's a little bit harder to fine-tune. I mean, I know the model in rFactor2 well. The biggest downside there, I would say, is that it's quite an expensive process to change parameters on the tire and recalculate everything. I mean, we used to have to wait for 24 hours to get a new version of a tire if we tweak the parameters. Yeah, you end up there with a model that's harder to tweak because you're driving the car, you get feedback, and you tweak the tire and you have to wait another day. That's not really a quick way of iterating and improving. So if you take the time, you'll get it right and you get great results. But it's probably not the fastest way, and we've had lots of discussions with, for example, Niels, who is a big fan of the more empirical models because they're easier to change and quicker to work with.
So it all gets very confusing very quickly, even though you can get fantastic data from the tire manufacturer. The issue is that, right, you've got this data. First of all, there's a lot of data.
Yeah.
Secondly, some of the data that you've got could potentially be noise, or it might be correct, it might not be correct, so you don't know necessarily what is or isn't correct and what reasons are causing that data.
Yeah.
But then you also have to convert that data into your model for the specific simulator, and then work out what your simulator's doing with the data that's correct or not correct.
Exactly.
And then at the end of the day, even if you have all the supposed data that you think is correct, you still are going to have to trial it with driver feedback, subjective, perceptive feedback, and then adjust it and tweak it and keep going backwards and forwards. So it seems like there's this really interesting battle between trying to line the sim up with data and this sort of conflict between objectivity and subjectivity and aligning the two to try and get to what reality is. But it's really hard to know what is reality.
Yeah.
So I think in sim racing, I get the perception that people sort of think, oh, there is this really obvious reality that we're going for, whereas the more you delve into it, actually it always sort of remains a bit murky.
Yeah.
And so one of the perceptions I have is that with this using a Pajenka type method, is the biggest benefit is purely the fact that you can iterate on it faster. So even if, in theory, it's not as good as a what was the other type model? How do you call it?
The finite
element type model.
Yeah.
Even if in theory it can't be as realistic in many ways, when it comes to actually developing a simulator, you can actually keep iterating, keep improving things, and get to something that's probably closer to reality quicker.
I think that's about right. Yeah. I mean, this is one of the most difficult subjects, right? And if you look in literature, you will find about 20 different tire models, and that kind of shows already that nobody really knows what the best model is. Otherwise, we would have ended up with one model that everybody uses, and we haven't so far. And it's still a little bit of a black art in that sense. But yeah, that's how you end up iterating and improving the car at the moment. Yeah.
So just to focus on driving this now, the BAC mono, and it is BAC, guys, not back. I've been told this. Everyone calls it a back mono. It sounds better calling it a back mono, but it is BAC mono.
Correct.
driving this in this simulator now, how this feels, maybe I can talk about the individual feelings and then you can relate back to me what's causing that, potentially. That'd be quite interesting. Turning into a corner here, we have a load up on the steering, and so is that when I turn and I'm rolling, what's causing that initial resistance for the force feedback to actually start counter steering? What's actually causing that?
Well, it has no power steering. That's the first thing. So it gets a bit heavier. But what you're feeling is basically coming from the steering geometry, creating those forces as you turn in, and obviously you're decelerating a little bit into the corner, so you're getting more load on the front of the car. What I have in terms of force feedback is literally the torque that I measure on the steering axis. So there's no artificial things added to that. It's just that feeling. Because I strongly believe that that's what you should be feeling, and that's what the physics provide. So that's what I'm working with right now, and that seems to work pretty well. I mean, there's still fine-tuning to do there, obviously. And we've had some feedback from real drivers about how it feels and how it feels at high speed and low speed and what we should be fine-tuning there. But in general, it seems to work pretty well.
With some other simulators on the market, I'm not going to say names because I don't want you to have to attack other simulators.
We all know them.
But with other simulators on the market, what I've noticed is that some of them tend to have a very kind of dull force feedback, almost quite realistic to how a real world car with power steering might feel. And even some race cars have very dull steering. But I've noticed with simulators you've worked on historically, you still have there's a really direct connection and range to the forces coming through the steering rack, and it doesn't feel dull, and you actually are getting a lot of information. And I mean, mate, is that information arguably unrealistically too much information? I mean, personally, I like that.
No, that's a good point, because the thing is, if you simulate a car, you create it out of different parts. And most of those parts are like infinitely stiff. They're like bodies that you connect together and they can move in certain directions. But like a steering axis, it's not modeled as a thing that has a little bit of give, right? If you had a steel bar and you would load it up, you would have a little, well, it basically acts like a spring, right? So there is some movement there. So arguably it's a little bit too harsh because we don't have that, and we really should add a little bit of that spring and damping in all those parts. And that is something that you can then play with as well. You can add that to the force feedback feeling, that little bit of spring feeling. So if you have a car that's not that stiff, that might be good to get closer to what you feel in the real car. Right now it's literally the feeling you get from a very stiff steering system, and that's arguably a little bit too much, but it also helps you a lot get a better feel for the car. So maybe that's an area where you go like, okay, it might not be 100% like this, but having that extra feedback helps you a little bit making up for the other cues that you don't have in the simulator, right? Like the motion, the butt feeling that you would get normally at the limit. So that's something we can play with a little bit.
And one of the things I've noticed, it doesn't seem to have it in this, but you see it in R Factor 2. You can set it up in Automobiles 2, and even ACC, a lot of simulators have it. Is that when you brake, you feel a sort of dip, it like a tug on the wheel, which I believe is from the suspension compressing. Is there a reason why that doesn't seem particularly prominent in this, or is that an added effect typically in other simulators?
I'm not sure if it's an added effect. I mean, it is indeed the suspension compressing, and that changes the geometry of it a bit as well. You don't feel a lot of that in this car, I would say, because it's a very light car. I mean, this car has a little bit of a Formula One style suspension, right, with the rockers and the springs really attached to the body. And you can kind of see that all compressing and moving. There's a little bit missing in the suspension because you see in the middle the two vertical arms of the anti-roll bar, and the sort of horizontal bar that's missing from the graphical model. I can enable that in the physics as well, but it's there. We just didn't model it because you don't see it. It's inside the car completely. So we decided to stop there. But the graphical model of the suspension is literally one-to-one the same thing as the physics use, and it's all moving exactly in the same way. And at the moment you even see the suspension on the other cars in a multiplayer session, so you get some really nice footage from all the cars if you're filming them from up close. But yeah, this is it's a really light car, so there's not a lot of strong forces, and you have to be a bit gentle because the sort of area, the range where it steers nicely into the corner is kind of smallish, and you have to kind of find that. We saw that with a lot of the drivers yesterday as well. It took them like 10-20 minutes to really find a good way to get this car to steer in well and to nicely kind of light drift out of the corners at maximum speed. But yeah, once you get the hang of that, it's very much a fun car to drive. Yeah,
I really like the handling of it.
Yeah.
With the physics frequency, so
Yeah.
this updates at 1,000 hertz. Can you explain why that is relevant? Why that can matter? Why it might not matter?
Yeah,
Why
definitely.
you've chosen to do that?
Yeah. I mean, it's not like 1,000 hertz is twice as realistic as 500 hertz. In theory, you have to run physics at a high frequency, because if you use a low frequency, the whole algorithm just isn't stable. And basically, if you set it very low, your car would instantly explode, because the errors you get from all the calculations, because your steps are way too big, they basically make the whole model unstable. So you have to go at least so high that it's always stable. And how high that exactly is, that also depends a little bit on all the little bits on the car that you model and how different they are in terms of size and weight. If there's a lot of difference between those parts, you typically have to go a little bit higher to keep it stable. If they're all roughly equal in size and weight, you can stay a little bit lower. So you see a lot of the sims going anywhere between 333, 400, etc. 720 for AMS1. There's all kinds of different frequencies that they use. So that's one part of the story. The other part is that you're moving at speed, so the bigger the time step, the more you travel each step, and potentially the more details on the track and in the whole motion of the car you are missing. I mean, at 200-300 kilometers an hour, each of those time steps is already a couple of centimeters. So if you're running over a small curb or a small stone or something, if the frequency is too low, you might completely miss it. One moment you're before, the next moment you're completely behind that obstacle, and you never feel it. So there is some merit in making sure that you use as little steps as possible, so you get the best fidelity from the track, even if you're moving at speed. Actually, I mean, I can run the sim also at 500 hertz, try that a lot. You don't really feel much of a difference driving the car doing that, so that's something I could consider, and that would definitely help in terms of specs to run the system, because right now you really do need a CPU with fast cores to make that work well.
So it's definitely it's a CPU rather than a GPU component.
Yeah.
It just adds more and more load to CPU.
Absolutely.
And then I assume if you're for multiplayer, and if you've got other cars or AI, you maybe, if you've got a really high frequency physics engine, you'd then have to make design choices that the AI vehicles maybe don't use the player's physics.
Yeah,
because
that could
it might be overwhelming if you have 60 other cars.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to have 60 cars, because basically each car uses up a full core. So even if you have like 8 or 12 cores in the system, that would be the theoretical maximum of number of AI that could drive with the player physics. So I haven't really decided what to do yet. There's a lot of research going on in terms of physics engines on how to use modern AI methods to take a more complex model and use AI to convert it into a simpler model that behaves almost the same as the complex model. Some of those things might be helpful when I try to create AI and I try to scale that. Haven't really looked into that. There's a lot to do. It hasn't come up on the priority list yet.
Games development doesn't just happen immediately and everything
No.
works perfectly overnight.
No, exactly. So first focus is on multiplayer. It's working well on LAN now. We've seen that yesterday. It still needs some work over the internet. The prediction algorithms I have still definitely need improvement to make them work if you want to raise people in Australia or something like that. So that's definitely going to be a focus in the next couple of months to see if I can improve that and scale that a bit more so we can have 40 or 50 cars on the server as well. And once I've cracked that nut, I'll start looking at the options for AI, how to do that. Yeah.
That's cool. Also, I think one of the interesting things I found with this project in particular is that your development process of it is that you've taken a really modular approach to the graphics engine using the Godot engine, which is an open source engine, but then the physics is completely separated from the graphics engine, which isn't that uncommon, but the degree to which you've separated everything out so that potentially you've got a platform here where you could license just the physics to another company, or this, another team could take this engine and do something completely different with it, without having as many problems they might have with previous engines, which were probably cobbled together without that planned in mind. Is there anything in particular in terms of that modular approach? Like, how did you start that process, or is there a specific way in developing?
Yeah, that's something that I basically did right from the start, because that's my background. I mean, I have a background in software engineering, and I've worked on many projects, and one of the projects I've been working on and teaching on for quite a while is how to do modularity in software. And there's all kinds of tools to help you create more modular system. But most of it is just a mindset.
You've got a background in teaching the processes of modularity, and basically I assume a lot of it is making sure that the bits of code are not dependent on other bits of code, and probably commenting it properly, and because inevitably there's going to be cases where bits of code are dependent on other bits of code.
Of course, yeah.
So then there's probably a whole structural process to that. There's probably lots of books that go into this.
Too many details.
Too many details.
But yeah, basically, if you have components that talk to each other, you might need to make sure that you have an API that's well defined, that you can evolve over time, and that everything talks through that API, that there's no backdoors, and some components use the backdoor to still do stuff to other components. So there's a bit of discipline involved in that, and it's just some design principles that help with that, where you, that was a pedal set sliding. So yeah, that's just a couple of processes and design choices that you use when you're setting this up, and that helps you with the whole process. And
that's cool. Back to tyres again, the exciting world of tyres. So driving this car now, the thing that I noticed with this is, first of all, like the grip levels feel absolutely fantastic. The car's responding really nicely. But crucially as well, you can overdrive, and you can overdrive it comfortably, which is historically been quite a big issue in a lot of simulators. I mean, Richard Burns Rally did it perfectly fine. Automobilista 1 does it quite well. We've gone forwards and backwards all over the place over the last 20 years. But what is it specifically that's making this car able to grip nicely and bitey when you're not overdriving it, but then if you do overdrive it and you do start getting a lot of slip, what is allowing that balance to still be there and the controllability? without it being able to be completely cheesed, if you know, like what you'd expect from an arcade game?
Yeah.
It's a nice, easy question for you to answer.
Nice,
there.
I mean, and there's a nice, easy answer to that even. And that's really that I'm not doing anything special for that. I'm just making sure that I'm modeling the car exactly as it is in real life, with the right weights, with the right inertias of the different components, with the right hard points and steering geometry and that kind of stuff. If you just put in those numbers, you get a car that ends up nicely balanced, like the real car really, because that has been designed obviously by people who are experts at that kind of stuff. And for this car, I've actually been in touch with the guy who designed the whole suspension. It's a Dutch guy. He's living in Switzerland right now. He's worked in Formula One. He's designed many cars, and he also did large parts of the BAC Mono, and incidentally also the Donkervoort that we will be working on. So same guy building suspensions for different brands, and he's obviously doing a good job, because I just put in the numbers from him, and all of that stuff suddenly just starts working well.
So it really is a case of correct data where possible.
Yeah, where possible. Yeah.
Getting that data, testing it having an engine, a physics engine that can interpret that data correctly. So you need enough tire parameters, suspension parameters. You need all the parameters in the actual simulator to use that data. But then you're going to need to need to get competent drivers to then run loads of stuff, test things out, to help you then identify stuff that's, from, if you drive lots of cars or you obviously look at telemetry, you know that something's a bit weird. Yeah. And then you keep going back to the data and then working out if you've interpreted the data incorrectly, or if it's something that needs improving with the physics engine.
Exactly.
Backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards.
Backwards and forwards. And David has been a great help there. I mean, he has driven thousands of laps at this circuit and looked at all the data, talked to the test drivers. And we've also had some help from another guy called Kevin Abbering. He was a World Rally Car driver, so he kind of knows how to throw cars around and stay out of the trees and stuff like that. And he has this gift that he's very good at giving feedback and also making fine adjustments to physics files to make sure that the feedback he gives also gets implemented into improvements of the engine. So they've been working together on fine-tuning this car after the initial version was built. And I would say they've done a pretty good job so far. It's very pleasant to drive. And,
Okay, getting even more nerdy here. This video, if people are managing to get through this, it's all right. This is going to be an archive of. It's great. I love talking about this kind of stuff. Yeah. It's fantastic. Even more nerdy. When it comes to tire models as well, what about thermal modelling? So I've heard that even on the professional Formula One simulators, when they're often doing a lot of times when the drivers are using them, they turn the thermal modelling off because it's just so complicated to process, and the actual doesn't necessarily affect basic driving. What this is really hard to phrase the question, but what do you think the relevance of thermal modelling of tyres is, and the degree to which thermal modelling should affect the handling characteristic of a vehicle?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I hear the same things, and you see a lot that they turn those things off in professional simulators. I mean, it's on the one hand, it's probably because it's hard to get it right, and if you don't get it right, it's not really worth doing, right? Because you're not getting any relevant feedback for the real car. I mean, those teams use the simulator to improve the car over the weekend quickly, because they can't keep driving it. So they have to make sure that they maximize the time that they have in that simulator. You also hear the same from companies like Van Amersfoort. We had Felix van Delft tell a little bit about that in the seminar earlier here. And I heard similar stories from them. They turn that off also because that makes it easier to really compare drivers and compare lap times. If all the circumstances are exactly the same, any differences you see in the telemetry are the drivers. And that's kind of an interesting point, right? Because ultimately, if you're sim racing, a lot of the time we're talking about BOP and stuff like that, and first we make all the cars different, then we try to make them all the same again because we want a fair competition. So yeah, that's an interesting point. Maybe we should be doing less of those models just to get more even playing field, and that might increase the fun. That's not to say that I don't want to make thermal models and wear and stuff like that. I think it does add to the simulation, especially if you start overheating tires. They definitely should become more slippery and stuff like that. So it has value adding those things. But yeah, you might get an equally fun game not having them and just having all of this being about the driving.
Yeah. I don't want to take up your whole day, so we'll get towards the end of this here. One of the interesting things I think that I find interesting, I think a lot more experienced sim racers start to find more interesting now, are the aspects of the tyre wear, tyre degradation, and how that takes place, how that's simulated. Is that something that's a plan with the last garage, and also how is that technically implemented into a simulator like this?
Yeah, it's definitely planned, and I always first look at literature when I'm trying to implement these things, and there are several papers and extensions to the tire models I'm using right now to implement those effects. So I'm still looking into those, it's early days, but I definitely want to have those features in as well, because I think it does help, and it could make some competitions and some races more interesting. If you go to the longer endurance events, for example, really managing tires and saving them, that's really part of the strategy and really part of that whole experience. So that should definitely be in. It's not in right now, but it's definitely on the roadmap.
Do you think you can achieve the effect of it in a relatively simplified way? So, for example, obviously you've got, you know, how much slip has been applied to the tyres over a period of time, and then you just say, well, if X amount of slip has occurred over this period of time, we'll have a bar that goes down that effectively represents grip. But that would obviously be a very simplistic way of doing it. Yeah. But do you think that might actually be fine? That would work good enough?
I mean, like the empirical tire models, if you get those parameters right, and you have a model where you have wear on the tire and grip on the tire. So if you want to simulate those, if you have the right parameters and you go with a model where my wear will increase whenever I'm putting load on the tire and whenever I'm putting slip on the tire, I think those are the two primary things that will make a tire wear. Maybe in combination also with temperature, right? Because if the tire gets hotter, it wears more quickly. So you can take those parameters and even make a fairly simple model to create tire temperatures and tire wear, and have that be a fun experience in the game, and have that probably, if you fine-tune it enough, be quite close to how the real tire responds. Because you typically hear teams talk about tires and they go like, yeah, you can wear them until they're about 50% worn, and then you have a little cliff and it drops in performance really fast. You lose all the grip, and that's really the point where you have to come in and change the tire. And up to that point, you get only a slight degradation in terms of performance. So if you get those parameters right, it might not even be that difficult to get something that's close to what the real cars are experiencing there. Yeah.
Okay, and then sort of get towards wrapping this up.
Yeah.
What's the end goal for Last Garage? I mean, at the moment it's still in a very, very early development phase. Though I actually really love how this handles, and the force feedback's great. Tracks. I mean, it's got very minimal graphics, but actually looks nice as a simulator. So I like how this is right now. I mean, you could probably even get away with releasing this as a super duper early access. No, it's not really your plan. No. But what is the sort of the roadmap in your mind at the moment, and the general time scales you've been looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to turn this into a sim that gets into the hands of consumers, so you can buy it on Steam. That is the plan. I'm really looking for a bit of uniqueness in terms of concept for the sim. For example, I'm probably not going to try and put in as many cars as possible. I'd rather have 2 or 3 cars that handle really well, and then put in a bunch of tracks and make sure people enjoy that. I think that's a better way forward. It also makes sure that you're not instantly fragmenting your user base that much, right? If people are all driving the same cars and same tracks, there's a better chance of them racing each other and having fun together. I think that's important. And as long as a car is fun to drive, I don't think it matters that you only have a few of them. You'll just keep going. At least that's what I'm hoping. So I'm looking to create something like that, more focused on good experiences. Probably timeline is still a couple of years until we get to a release. I'm not a big fan of early access. I want to make sure that everything works well. And we have at least a bunch of content in that's fun to use, fun to drive. Obviously, over time, I'll add more content. That's pretty normal. But definitely want to make sure that I have a polished experience before I release that, and that's why I'm taking my time. I'm not mentioning any dates or anything. I have no publishers breathing down my neck saying you must release at Christmas. I'll release it when I think it's good and good enough to get into the hands of people. So yeah.
So at the moment, my perception of this is it's still in the core engine development phase.
Absolutely.
Process. Yeah. You're not really the sort of game design, the packaging part of it, and that's just not even.
That's very basic.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen the menus. They're there. They're buttons. They're not polished in any way. The head-up display. I actually want to get rid of it completely because I think you get a better driving experience and immersion not having any HUD at all, just having everything in the car.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. It's something I really want to make a video about actually. But the thing you notice is when you take off HUD elements, you then focus on what is there.
Yeah.
And the HUD elements are actually in the cars because, well, real-wheel drivers need to see what's there. Exactly. So that's what you notice.
Yeah.
But it's quite interesting if you turn the in-game steering wheel off, you then look at your real steering wheel, and again, that can be really immersive. So, but that's going along back to the sort of early Netcar. Do you remember Netcar Pro? And you had to start the car up and everything. Exactly. It's this kind of the mega nerdy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to frustrate people with that, so it has to remain accessible. But I also want to be as immersive as possible and not make it look like a game and more really look like a simulator. So,
absolutely. So this could turn out to be the absolutely mega super hardcore simulator that the mega hardcore sim fans are looking for. But I have held you hostage for what probably feels to you like a millennia. His beard, he didn't have a beard at the start, and now he's just grown a beard. But it's absolutely fantastic to talk and nerd out about this kind of stuff. I'm sure, guys, if you come to Sim Formula Europe, you'll be able to sit and talk, and you do a seminar as well, so you go through details. So I think that's a really nice thing with Sim Formula Europe. Actually, it's a good opportunity to really sit down and get into the nuts and bolts conversations. I don't think you get at any other sim racing event. But thank you. Thank you for sitting down with me with this. I'm going to drive it a bit myself. I'm pushing a bit, and we'll do a video actually talking about the experience of driving it. But yeah, they're very good.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Awesome.
Yeah.